I know the word. I don't
Yeah,
necessarily know what it is. Tourbillon,
tourbillon, tourbillon.
tourbillon, right? So I know that there's a word tourbillon. I have no idea what a tourbillon is.
All right, so that's kind of like what you and I discussed about doing this little series here is maybe, kind of going through what questions you have and trying to.
Welcome back to the WatchGauge YouTube channel. My name is John Keel, and I am launching a new series called Learning Watches with Zack. So we've got a new member of the team here at WatchGauge. His name is Zack, who I'll introduce you to in just one moment. He's on board as the Chief Operations Officer. And although he's extremely accomplished in the world of business and being an operations officer, the guy who organizes and prepares everything and makes sure everything is running smoothly, he is very, very new to the world of wristwatches. Now, he works remotely from the WatchGauge HQ where I am currently, but we've been together a few times for a few meetings, and it's really great because his enthusiasm for learning about watches is really, I find it to be infectious. So during the course of our conversations, he's asking me about movements and dials and bezels and brands and all these sorts of things that a new watch guy would be seriously like just super interested in. And he brought up the idea of maybe adding it to the YouTube channel as almost an educational series. So we shot our first episode yesterday, and it's really about just touching the surface on the different types of movements in watches, quartz, automatic, manual wind, and the pros and cons of each different type of movement. And in full disclosure, the whole intro section of that video somehow did not save properly. We did the video via Zoom, so I'm reshooting this intro, and I don't want to make this much longer than it has to be. So let's just jump right into the video of Zack learning about watches. I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah.
So last time you were out here, you were asking me about the different types of movements. We got into it a little bit, but we kind of paused and said, you know what, let's save this for our video series that we're going to be doing. So I know you were at Worn and Wound, the Worn and Wound wind up here in New York a couple weeks ago. Tell us a
Yes.
little.
So I went to Wind Up, and I also went to Watch Time. Two very different kinds of shows, two very different kinds of the clientele that they were bringing in. Wind Up was open to the public. It was open and airy. It was bright. Watch
Anybody
Time.
could come and go.
Watch Time had you were charged at the door. The lights were muted. Everything was covered in a nice black drape. It was a much more exclusive, much fancier, much more high end
I was going to say
kind
much
of
more expensive
show.
watches. Yeah.
Yeah. The cheapest watch I saw at Watch Time wasn't even close to the most expensive watch that I saw at Wind Up. Wind Up went to $7, $8, $10,000 for a watch. I don't think there was anything less than $40,000 at Watch Time. So
Wow.
we're looking at very, very different kinds of watches.
Yep.
And when I told you, like, a Timex and a Rolex are the same thing to me. It tells
Right.
time. Now, for your clientele, for the people that are watching this video, they're going to want to shoot me because how am I
No,
comparing a Timex and a Rolex? They're
my audience
very
is a whole lot
different
nicer than
watches.
that. My audience is a whole lot nicer than that. They're going to shoot you, but they might laugh at you a little bit.
So they're very, very different kinds of watches. But walking around, I talked to all the vendors. A lot of these guys they created their own watch. They're representing their own watch brand, from companies that are brand new. They only have one or two wristwatches that they're making now, to companies like G-Shock that had, I don't know, 40 or 50 kinds of watches that they
Right.
were displaying. And that for me was just funny because I grew up with G-Shock,
Yeah.
and the G-Shock was the $30 watch or whatever it was. It wasn't pretty, but it was waterproof. It was drop proof. It
Yeah.
was baby sister proof. It was like the old style Nokias. Atomic bombs are going off. The only thing that's left is a Nokia, a G-Shock, and a cockroach.
Yeah.
Everything
Right.
else is vaporized.
Well, that's funny you say that because that's why I decided to sell G-Shock on Watch Gauge because in my years and years of selling watches, and I sold everything from $150,000 watches to what we're selling now here on Watch Gauge. Um, almost everybody I've ever met, whether they're the guy who's buying a $40,000 watch or a $400 watch, almost every watch guy I've ever met at least owned or owns a G-Shock or many, right? Because that's the watch that you're going to put on when you're doing yard work, or you're just really, you don't want to bang up your nice, luxury watch, let's call it. Yeah, so that's why we brought G-Shock into WatchGauge, and it's interesting you brought that up.
Yeah, and now that it's a brand. They have Bluetooth, there's solar, there's so many different colors and styles, and like
And,
this
and
is
ranges as well. I mean,
yeah,
most people think of the G-Shock, they think of what's now $130. It's that resin, it's got that digital readout, maybe some hands on it. But WatchGauge particularly does really well with the G-Shocks that are in the $600 to $2,000 range. So for me, I don't have a ton of success selling the lesser expensive stuff, because you can find them on Amazon and everywhere else. I do really well with the stuff that is, a step up. But even so, I sold a G-Shock 2 or 3 years ago for about $7,800, which
really
even blew my mind. Yeah,
$7,800 for a G-Shock.
yeah, 7,800 or 7,600, right?
Wow.
Yeah, but so it's it's definitely an interesting brand. It's a fun brand to work with.
Yeah. So when I was walking around the show, and you go over and you talk to, hey, this is John Keel with watch brand A. So tell me about your watch. And it's a passion project for them. They're not just, these are, I'm wearing Target brand, whatever shirt and Walmart shorts today. Right? No one cares. When you're talking to someone in the watch business, it's like talking about a luxury car or this new house that you bought, and it's got this many bedrooms and it's got bathrooms and it's got a yard. So they tell you about the watch, and you can see the passion in, but more importantly, they start telling you about the parts that go into making the watch. So we used ABC type of movement, and we get Japanese this and a Swiss that and a German this, and they're telling me about the watch, and obviously what they're telling me means something.
Yeah.
But I have no idea what they're talking about. It's all Greek.
Yeah.
I don't understand it. On a car, you can tell me you have Goodyear tires. Wow, Goodyear tires. I know what Goodyear tires means.
Familiar with
I'm driving a Nissan, I'm driving a Hyundai, I'm driving a Maserati. I know what those names mean. But when you tell me you've got your A, B, C, D, E, F, G kind of movement in it, and we went with this versus the D, E, F, G, H, I, J movement,
Yeah.
like, wow, that's really interesting. I'm glad you thought of changing that movement. I have no clue.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I would have loved to have seen your face, because were you asking them more questions to build upon that, or you just like very politely going, "Oh wow, oh that's great."
So with the movements, it was mostly me smile and nod.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, for sure you used that movement. Like,
Great choice.
no
Mr.
one would
Jones.
ever think of putting, that
Something
other
else.
kind of movement. That's trash.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But some of the stuff I was able to follow up on because I talked to you. I talked to Gary from IW a few times, so I knew a little bit about watches.
Yeah.
So terms would pop up. I'm like, oh, I know what that is.
Yep. Yep.
I don't know. I know the word. I don't
Yeah.
necessarily know what it is.
Right.
Tourbillon.
Tourbillon.
Right. So I know that there's a word tourbillon. I have no idea what tourbillon is.
All right, so that's kind of like what you and I discussed about doing this little series here, is maybe, kind of going through what questions you have and trying to expand upon your knowledge, but also make it in an entertaining way that it hopefully helps people, who watch the channel as well.
Yeah. So let's just talk movements, because that's an easy place to start.
Sure.
What is, if I'm making my own watch,
Yeah.
where would I even start to look for movements? Because you've got Japanese, Swiss, and Chinese. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it would really depend on a lot of factors, right? I mean, the big factor would be, are you looking to build a watch with a hand wound mechanical movement or an automatic
Oh,
that winds
that's something
itself.
else. Mechanical means what?
So in I guess it would be kind of jargon when somebody says a mechanical watch. I mean, technically, a hand wound watch and an automatic watch are mechanical, meaning that there's
Okay, because that was
springs and
also
gears
something
in
they
there.
said a few times. It's like, yeah, we
Yeah,
have it's a mechanical
and
watch.
and unfortunately, in my mind, when I think of a hand wound watch that you have to wind, I think the word mechanical, right? So it's sort of industry jargon. But so you have a hand wound, which is a watch with gears and springs and no battery that you physically have to wind. And as you wind the watch, the spring will get tighter, and eventually the crown will not want to move, and it's fully wound. And then that watch will tick, depending on the movement, maybe for 2 days. And then after those 2 days, the movement will stop. And back in the 1920s, Fortis introduced the first automatic mechanical watch, which means the movement itself has a rotor attached to it or built into it, where as you're moving all day long, that rotor is spinning. And as that rotor spins, it's performing the same exact function as if you were to sit there and wind it. It's
Got
basically
it.
putting
Okay.
tension on that spring. So you have hand wound, or what I call mechanical, right? Then you have an automatic, which automatically winds itself. And then you've got a quartz. A quartz movement is has got a battery in it. Technically, I mean, I don't want to get too far into the weeds with the real technical details because I don't even know a lot about the quartz technology, but there's a quartz crystal in there that once the battery is synced up to it and provides the energy, the quartz crystal vibrates at a very, very, very high rate of speed, which gives the watch the timekeeping ability. So
Got it.
the three major, I mean, there are not hundred, there are many, many different types of movements. And again, we can get far into the weeds and the video could be very long. But the three major type of movements that you're going to see in 99% of the watches out there in the market are going to be the hand wound, which aren't even that prevalent, then the automatic mechanical, and the quartz. So that would be really the first question would be, where do you want to, if you're building your own watch, what would you put in there? And, you know, in my opinion, at this point, in this market, assuming you want to build a brand or sell it, I would say your choices are really between automatic and quartz, because that's what people are really buying.
Because no one wants to sit and set a timer every 40 whatever hours. Oh, I got to wind my watch again.
When you say nobody, I would say the majority of people don't. Yeah. There are certainly people who are completely passionate about that, and winding, setting watch. I have a clock on the wall that's an 8-day mechanically, hand wound watch. And for a long time, I loved winding it. I loved coming in, make sure it's set correctly, winding it, and it was neat. But I kind of lost that passion a while back. So.
So like grandfather clocks and your old style pocket watches, those had to be wound by hand
Yeah.
every whatever.
However many days were that particular movement, was rated for. Yeah. And, they can either be wound using, like particularly clocks. I mean, they have a key that you insert and spin, and,
I remember one in my great aunt's house. She had a clock, and every hour it dinged and it played
yeah,
that little tune.
right.
And every Sunday there we were.
Winding it.
It was an exciting thing because as a kid,
Yeah, sure.
it's like the old wind up toys. It's like, oh, we get to put the key in and we're gonna wind it and we're
Yep.
gonna watch it get set. And
Yeah, it's very cool. It's very cool. Yeah. And then, with those three types of movements or there are benefits, pros and cons to each, um, so it
okay,
depends on what you're looking for.
so pros and cons. So with an automatic, or let's call them both mechanical, like you said, mechanical watches, right? Those have to be either wound repeatedly or worn in order for them to keep time.
Correct.
A battery operated one runs until the battery runs out.
Correct. Yeah.
So
So like the Draken I'm wearing here, right? If I wear this, if I pick it up in the morning, I put it on my wrist and I wear it all day. When I put it down at night, it's fully wound. Now, if I don't pick it up again, the watch will continue to run for about 42 hours. But then after that, I'd have to pick it up, wind it, give it a, initial wind and set it again. Where a battery watch, or a quartz powered watch, I could pull that out of my drawer after sitting there for a year and a half and still be running properly.
So why would someone choose one over the other? Is one, for lack of a better term, is one better?
So, it's an interesting question. A lot of times I will tell watch guys, a quartz watch is so much better, just to see the reaction, right? Because guys who are into purchasing watches, or watch collectors typically really want an automatic watch. And when I get that reaction from guys who are into watches, into collecting watches, when I tell them a quartz watch is better, it's sort of a joke for me, because technically a quartz watch keeps much, much better accuracy in timekeeping than an automatic typically would. But there's something romantic about a automatic watch. The fact that there are so many gears and springs and moving parts in there that all combined, keep this thing within, let's say, 8 or 10 seconds accurate a day. And that's just, it's almost romantic. It's fascinating, right? Like, because if you see an automatic watch actually ticking and in motion, and then you add to that, if you can put into your brain that these things were created 100 years ago without the use of computers and all this crazy technology. So to me, I much prefer an automatic watch, because it's the art of watchmaking to me. But of course, I have where did I put it? I must have picked it up. I have a quartz powered chronograph from Drac, and that, that's fantastic. If I wake up and, I'm hustling on the weekend or something, I need to grab a watch, throw on my wrist and run. That's what I do. So there's pros and cons of both, for sure.
Okay. So next, do any of the high-end brands, Rolex, Tag, Patek, just the names that I know, I'm sure there's hundreds more. Do any of them make quartz watches, or once you hit that high end, you're only making automatics?
It's funny you asked that. They do.
Really?
I'm not 100% sure if Patek or Rolex still do, but certainly in the history, and not so distant history, they did. I mean, for many years, there's a Rolex called the Oyster Quartz that, I remember when I was selling Rolexes, you couldn't give these things away. But then I heard that they're in high demand now because they had discontinued them some years back. So and they were solid gold. I mean, there would be a $19,000 quartz Rolex. There were a couple of different models from Patek that were quartz. On the lower end, or the entry level of high-end luxury watches, such as Tag Heuer and Omega and brands like that, they still to this day make quite a few quartz watches.
So entry level. So we're talking 20K, 30K, 40K.
Even lower than that. I mean, so Tag Heuer, you could buy a quartz Tag Heuer for like $1,500 or something like that currently.
Really?
Yeah, but it's it's a battery powered.
Yeah, but
so the quartz movements are more affordable. That's another. I guess you call it a pro of a quartz watch. But yeah, they're making them currently.
okay. So Japanese, Swiss, Chinese, who are there any other countries that are making movements now? Because those were the names that came up most often. We're using the Japanese movement, we're using a Chinese movement.
The United States is now making them with our good friend Gary over at IW and their venture out in out in Arizona. They are now making quartz American-made watch movements, from what I'm pretty sure of. And I heard that they're working on some automatics as well. And then it's just when in terms of movements and the places they're being made, it's very similar to a lot of other industries in terms of level. People will pay a premium for a Swiss quartz movement, over, let's say, a Chinese or a Japanese. personally, I don't really understand too much why, because at the end of the day, it is a pretty simple battery operated movement. In terms of automatics and mechanical watches, I think there's a drastic quality in terms of where the movements are made. However, there's a caveat, in my opinion, and I might make some enemies here. I will probably almost 10 days out of 10 take a Miyota automatic Japanese movement over an entry level Swiss movement most of the time. The reason being is I find that in particularly over the years of selling watches through WatchGauge, I've had very few issues with Miyota automatics and Seiko automatics, where I have sold watches with a very entry level Swiss movements and have seen issues, but it's not always the case. But for the price premium that you would pay for a Swiss automatic, I happen to like. If you're looking to lower the price on a automatic watch and be super reliable, I'm a big fan of the Japanese automatics.
Really? So, because growing up, and I assume most people in my shoes, Swiss watches is a thing.
Sure.
Swiss
A huge
cheese,
thing.
Swiss chocolate, Swiss watches. Those are three
Right.
things that people associate, and the Alps. But
Yeah.
when people think of good timekeeping and of the quality of a watch or of a clock, Swiss is what comes to mind.
I agree, and absolutely 100%. Swiss movements and I'd like to lump in there German movements, but you're not going to find an inexpensive German movement. Swiss movements are certainly the cream of the crop, but there are also different levels of Swiss movements, right? Like there are
Well, obviously, yeah.
so you could take the same movement from some companies. I'm not going to say names, but and you can get 3 different levels of that or 4 different levels of that where, this one is finished, it's regulated, it's got like different decorations on it and so on and so forth. And every step down, the one down here is basically they assemble all the parts, barely test it and sell it to a third party watchmaker, somebody building watches. It's these ones that I'm not a huge fan of because, particularly for the brands I sell, like NTH, Draken, Alsta, and a few others, they will get, if there's a Japanese movement in a particular watch, that movement is regulated, it's tested. The accuracy that you'll see in the NTH or a Draken or an Alsta or some of the others that I deal with are just off the charts because each and every watch is individually tested and checked out for the amplitude and all this other stuff. So I've worked with companies in the past that I no longer work with who use that really low end entry level Swiss, and even the brand themselves never tested the movement, right? So, I'm trying to sell a watch, but it's 31 seconds off a day because nobody ever bothered to make sure that movement was running properly. Those are the ones I had issues with.
So they're using a Swiss movement to be able to say, "Oh, I'm using a Swiss movement," but they're using bottom of the barrel.
Because the truth of the matter is, a guy like you may be looking at, let's say this NTH with, a Miyota 9 series in it, right? Or this watch here that has a very, entry level Swiss movement that is unregulated, unchecked. You as a consumer, particularly a guy like you, is going to go, well, I'm going to go for the one with the Swiss movement, right? When in reality, if you bought both of them and tested them side by side and wore them for 3 months, you'd find out that the Miyota may, in many cases, just operate much better than that entry level Swiss. That's kind of my take on it. Again, this whole segment might cause a little bit of discussion or a little bit of
Well, that's what it's about.
It is.
This
It
whole
is.
thing was to start a conversation and to see which way people discuss the watches, because like I'm entry level.
Well,
I'm going to step on a whole lot of toes here.
No, I think that's why you and I thought about this idea and we're like, I think it sounds like a great idea. Now I'm hoping the audience finds the same. But to me, it's there are a lot of opinions in the watch industry, along with, along with what's fact and what is evidence, right? And part of that is the fun of being into watches, right? Like, one of my very best friends and I have completely separate tastes. And he'll look at a watch like, oh man, I love that thing. And I'm like, eesh, I'm like, I wouldn't wear that to a crap fight. You know what I mean? And that's part of the joy of this whole watch journey. And one of the things I thought would be really cool is to have conversations with you. Because I find it fun as well. And believe it or not, so much of what I learn even today comes out of conversations with guys who are newer into the watch industry, right? Or newer into watch collecting. And to me, it's very interesting. And quite frankly, it rekindles my love of why I got in this business in the first place. You know?
So with watch collecting, and again, and I'm talking as a beginner, do people typically focus on a time frame? Like, I collect 1600s, I collect 1950s. Do people
Sure.
collect specific brands?
Sure.
People collect specific, because walking around the watch show, again, outsider, I couldn't tell the difference, but ooh, that's a pretty watch. That's a pretty watch. Now, I could have been looking at very pretty exteriors, and like you said, it's using that cheap Swiss movement, and it's going to break on me 6 months down the line.
Oh,
It's going to
let's
lose
not
a
go
minute
that
a
far. Let's
day.
not go that
No,
far. The watch,
I,
we're going to create too much hate here. Honestly, I love the entry level Swiss watches.
no,
I
I'm
was emphasizing really quick. I'm emphasizing more of what a great Japanese automatic movement is, and let's say a $500, $600, $700, $800 watch. But yes, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So do people collect just because a watch is pretty, even
So
if it's not necessarily a best movement or it's not
I
a
will.
best brand?
I'll give you a really, really short answer, but I think that would be a fantastic topic for our next video or another video to come, because that collecting in and of itself it's there are so many people and so many different reasons and goals and of how people collect. So I think we can have a really cool conversation about that by itself. The one thing that I will say is that the one thing I've been telling everybody I ever have sold a watch to in the last 22 years now is, at the end of the day, the only thing that matters the most is that when you put it on your wrist, it's sort of an extension of you, right? It's your style. It's there's a purpose of why you're wearing the watch you're wearing. And again, I would love to have a conversation about that for one of our next videos. But the one thing I tell people is, when it's on your wrist and you look down at it, do you aesthetically really enjoy the way the watch works? In your mind, the way it looks, I should say, right? Because you're the one who's going to be like all day long, oh, I've got a meeting. Oh, I got to pick up the kids or whatever it may be. You're the one looking at it. And if you don't find it appealing, it doesn't matter. It could be the best, the most expensive, the most whatever watch on the planet. If you don't enjoy it, there's almost no purpose to wearing it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, I mean, there are people that like to flaunt just because they like to flaunt, and
100%.
they don't care what it looks like. They just like to be able to say, "Oh, look, I'm wearing $1 million on my wrist,"
Yeah.
which just blows my mind that a wristwatch can cost $1 million.
So it's
But
interesting you say that, because maybe it's not for the aesthetic look of it, but the feeling that that person gets when they look at that watch on their wrist, right? Like, I did an article once in Quill and Pad when I was writing for them on I think it was the 5 or 6 or 7 ugliest watches on the planet. And that was a fun article because I did get a lot of shit for that. But to me, it was done more in jest, more as a joke. But these watches truly exist, and people actually wear them. So I think if somebody spent 120 grand on a watch that, in my opinion, is completely hideous, they might even think it's hideous too. But they look at it and it makes them feel better because they got $120,000 watch on theirs. To me, it's the same thing as enjoying looking at it from an aesthetic appeal. When they look at the watch on their wrist, it gives them a certain feeling that. But to me, I've always told people you got to please yourself first. You got to look at the watch and realize you're wearing it for you before anything else, in my opinion.
I imagine it's the same way with people that collect art, because
Yeah, I suppose. And that's,
you could look at a piece of art and you're like, that is the ugliest thing I have ever seen in my life. Who painted that? And
yeah,
why would someone paint that and sell it?
I'll take it a
And someone
step
else is
further.
looking and I'm like, that's genius.
I'll take it a step further. I've never once in my life looked at a piece of art and said, man, I wish I could hang that on my wall. Not once. Not a single piece of art on the planet. I would prefer to have my Ford versus Ferrari movie poster over there, or a reproduction of an Omega ad from the 1930s that's on my wall. I don't understand art. I know that's going to drive some people absolutely berserk. But I had this conversation with a friend of mine who, the same guy who has a complete different watch taste I told you about, he enjoys art, and I don't understand it. Not a single piece of art have I ever looked at and said, I would love to have that hanging on my wall, which again, I might make some enemies, but I don't know. I love my Funko Pops, man. I love my guitars hanging on the wall. But again, that, to me, it circles all back to watches, right? We all have our own tastes, our own preferences, our own way we think of things. And I love when people and I have different thoughts and ideas and processes and opinions, because to me, it's a way we can connect on something that we typically wouldn't connect on, right? I made a lot of friends in this world, like really good friends that I met through watches. And I don't think we completely agree. None of us completely agree on everything, you know? That's
Right.
part of the fun. So,
Okay.
well,
Well,
I
thank you,
think,
John.
I think, I think, uh, I think it was a great conversation. Again, we thought of starting this for the channel because I think there's a ton of people out there doing education on watches, which I've also done. But I think having conversations is a bit of a different way to do it. It's a bit more fun, and it's, we didn't pre-plan any of this really, other than let's start with the basics, talk about movements, right? And
Right.
as you guys can all see, the conversation kind of morphed into a whole lot more. So that's sort of the goal here. But as an audience, I'll say I hope you enjoyed it. I'd like you guys to, officially get to know Zack, because I think you're going to see a bit of him. And then the other thing is too, is we would love from you guys any comments, any questions. Listen, it's watches, right? So if there's any hate out there on any of the things we said, it's not that important in life. So, tap the brakes on that stuff. But let's get some feedback. If you guys have certain things you want to talk about, I know when Zack and I were talking about what topics we would do, we're talking about the purposes of the different types of bezels and what is a GMT watch and what are the different types of chronographs. So we're going to try to cover a lot of that stuff. But we would love to hear from you guys of what you would like to hear about us talking about.
And if you guys have any questions that you've been too embarrassed to ask because you are a watch guy, but you never found out what a turbulon is, right? Did I get that one right?
No, tourbillon.
Tourbillon.
The L's are silent, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're too nervous to ask your friends because you should know what it is, send us a text message, send us an email, and
Yeah.
I'll ask the question.
In the comment in the YouTubes below, on the YouTube comments below, put something in there. And listen, I'm not 100% right on everything I talk about either. A lot of what I've learned has been through word of mouth, and I have actually posted stuff on this channel where people have like written to me and corrected me in a big way. And I think one time I actually pulled the video down. I think it's one of the only videos I ever pulled down because I thought I was pontificating on something that, I was told was the process of something within the watch industry. And apparently the person who taught me was completely wrong. So listen,
The
none of
moon
us
is
are
made out of
infallible.
green cheese.
Yeah, none of us are infallible. Green cheese. Yeah. Yeah. So, all right. So Zack, thanks for taking the time to jump on and do this with us. And let's look forward to doing it again. Guys, I hope you enjoyed it. Again, give us a thumbs up if you did enjoy it. And if you have any feedback, good, bad, or ugly, drop it in the comments below. And we'll look forward to doing this again.
Thanks, guys.
All right.